Hi, everybody. Welcome to the colloquium. Today is a great pleasure for me to introduce to you one of us, Jesús Fernández-Villaverde. Jesús is the Howard Marks Presidential Professor of Economics, and he's also the director of the Penn Initiative for the Study of the Markets, and he has a lot of recognitions and accomplishments. He's also a research associate of the PSC. You may remember him from the last time he presented here, which was in Spanish.
Yes.
And the Latin American students complained about it, so we decided to do it in English. So Jesus is a big idea person. He publishes in a wide array of areas, and he's always expanding the economic approach to the wide area of research. Recently, he has published a review article on climate change and what the macroeconomic perspective can contribute towards our understanding of climate change. He has always been concerned about population change and macroeconomic processes. He maintains an aggregate level perspective that sometimes we lose it here in the PSC, so that's very good for us. He's actively participating in discussions about the consequences of recent population changes for economic growth and social organization. He recently published a commentary, an article on the global fertility crisis is worse than you think. It has attracted a lot of attention and a very provocative argument. All of these issues are core to the Population Studies Center, so it's a great pleasure to have Jesus share with us his ideas on population change. Welcome.
It's always so nice to be back in McNeil. You feel McNeil is the home. A little bit like when you go back to your high school and you say, really like McNeil. Anyway, so the other day I was talking with Emilio and he said, why don't you kind of try to, so I have written a lot of papers about this stuff lately. And he told me, why don't you try to do a presentation that is kind of summarizes a little bit what we're thinking about. So this is going to be a little bit different in the sense that there's no like paper that I'm going to follow line by line. I'm going to be summarizing things I have been reading several papers and also something that I'm writing right now. And the motivation for my most recent draft that I'm working is that on July 12th, just a couple of months ago, the United Nations published the new United Nations World Population Prospect. And in the US, a little bit less, but many countries outside the US, this is big news. These are countries where maybe there is not very good national statistics, or maybe countries where the demographic analysis is not of the highest quality, and suddenly the United Nations says something, and that has a lot of impact on the news. And also, we have had a lot of data coming out over the last 3-4 years, where we can look a little bit at what has happened in the aftermath of COVID-19. And in fact, we already have data for a lot of 2024. Just this morning, I was checking some recent statistical releases from several countries. And, you know, there's also, as we were mentioning before, a renewed interest in the policy debates. That there is this movement called the neonatalist. I don't know if that's a good name or not, but certainly this has become sufficiently important that even in the presidential campaign, people are talking about this, both candidates have been talking about it. So it seems that this is a good moment for me to tell you a little bit what I have been thinking, but basically it's for you to give me feedback. You probably know a lot of this stuff way better than I do. I may be doing something silly with the data, so tell me right away so I can stop myself from keeping spreading silliness around the world and increasing confusion. As I mentioned before, this is work with a lot of different co-authors, but for this presentation in particular, for a review article we are writing on the new United Nations World Population Prospect, this is joint work with Patrick Norrie, who's a fantastic pre-doc at AEI. Okay, so the motivation, as I was saying, is that the United Nations, roughly every 2 years, sometimes every 3 years, publishes an update of their population prospect. And they include over there both estimates of the world population, fertility, mortality, life expectancy, and population levels. And also they have a forecast. they have a forecast until the year 2100. And they have been doing this now for 28 times. And what I want to do is I want to summarize some of the main results in case that you were the summer and didn't pay attention to the new results. I'm going to offer you my assessment, and I'm going to tell you basically the punchline is there is a lot of things I don't understand on the new population prospect. There's really a lot of numbers that do not fit in anything that I can make a lot of sense, and then I'm going to use it as a springboard to think about further ideas. Unless otherwise stated, I will present data from the medium variant. The whole prospect has a medium variant, a high fertility variant, and a low fertility variant. So let me go with the medium. All the data is going to be as of July 1st of every year, the mid of the year, and I will do the standard round. I say that because you are going to see a couple of times where I tend to subtract something from another, and it looks like I'm missing one. I was able to pass primary school algebra. It's just because I'm using the round. Also, I'm happy if you stop me in any moment and ask me questions. I'm also happy to talk later the Q&A, and I'm happy to talk about this as long as it needs. As I said over there, I'm good, and I often do talk about this for hours to no end. And in fact, while I will try my best to stay within the 60 minutes allocated, I could talk about so many more things, and maybe what you are really interested is not in the presentation. Send me an email, and I will be more than happy. And that goes especially for graduate students. I will be more than happy to meet for you for coffee, and we can talk about some of the ideas. So let me go then, as I was mentioning before, just summarizing what the World Population Prospect says. And the main result, number one, is that peak humanity. By peak humanity, I mean the moment where the United Nations claims that the United forecast, that the world population will peak is a little bit closer.
So peak number.
Yeah, the peak
humanity.
Yes.
Not sure this is peak humanity when we max out our total numbers.
Well, yeah, peak number. Yeah, a peak population. Yeah, no, that's fine. I can change that. So the peak of the world population is forecast now to be 2084, and it's forecast to be at 10.289 billion. And after that, it will start going down. And by the end of the forecast period, it will be 10.18 billion. And it's going to be falling at around 12 million a year by the year 20. This is a reduction in the total population with respect to the previous 2022 release, where the peak was forecast to be 2086, 2 years later, and at 10.43 billion. And I have a nice plot over there where you see in red the 2022 forecast, and in blue the new one. And you can see over there, you see over there that we are taking over there around 150 million people from the forecast, and then that this is going to be falling faster at the end. Now, this reduction in total population keeps with a systematic reduction that we have seen since 2015. So in 2019, the world population was forecast to still be growing by the year 2100, and back then it was going to be 10.857 million. The United Nations did not forecast that we were going to reach a peak. So in that sense, the 2022 was really, in some sense, a very, very fundamental change in the forecast, because they say now, for the first time, there's going to be a peak and then we go down. You go to 2017, you have 11,184 million. And if you go to 2015, you have 11,213 million. So basically, what we have is over the last 10 years, we have taken out roughly 1 billion people from the forecast in 2100. That's a lot. I mean, 1 billion people is a lot. It's a lot for two reasons. First of all, because 1 billion people is a lot of people. But second, because the population today is already 8.16 billion. So it means that instead of forecasting that we were going to grow another 3 billion, now we are forecasting we are only going to grow 2 billion. So in terms of the growth, is only 66% of what we thought it was going to happen. The population today, according to the United Nations, is slightly higher by 100 million people than what they forecast in 2015 it was going to be today. and later I will go to tell you why the difference came. Okay? So in that sense, it's also the case that the amount that we have left to grow is a little bit lower because of a level effect with respect to the base year. Now, where do the adjustments come from? So as I was mentioning before, the change is around 140 million people. And I'm giving you the 4 largest changes in terms of lower population and the 4 largest reductions instead of higher population. Sorry, increases. So China is going down by 109 million. So basically what we are having over there is that they go from 927 million 2 years ago to only 829. This will be fun, and I will tell you exactly why this has happened. Then we have Nigeria, where they are taking out 55 million. Then we have the Philippines, where they have reduced 54 million. That's a lot, because we are going from 180 to 124. It's nearly 1/3 of the population. In fact, I think that if you look at the data from the Philippines, the reduction should have been even lower, but I will come back to that later. And we have Niger with another 54 million people. On the other hand, they have increased the population forecast for Ethiopia, for Yemen, for Bangladesh, and for Uzbekistan. Okay? And the second or the third main result is that the total fertility rate is lower than had been anticipated, and the United Nations forecast that in 2024 is going to be 2 to 5. And these are, what I'm doing over here is I'm just showing you the evolution of the total fertility rate, both the estimated total fertility rate in the planet and the forecast. Something that has changed in 2024 is that in the past, the United Nations, when you go back to the 1950s and 1960s, will only give you total fertility rates in periods of 5 years. Now they do imputations year by year. How good those are, I'm not sure. But you basically can see that, you know, we have been going down very, very fast from around 5. And over here, what you see is something interesting, is that fertility during these years was a little bit higher than anticipated in the previous revisions, and that's why we are around 100 million people more now than in previous forecasts, but then it has fallen down a lot. So what I'm going to do is just plot for around 2010 to 2030, and you can see really how I was mentioning before, around 2000 up to 2017, fertility was higher than in previous forecasts, but then seems to have fallen really, really fast. Okay, so it really seems that around 2015, 2016, things have changed, and now we are falling more or less at the same speed that we were falling over here. And then what the United Nations forecast is that this drop is going to slow down, and we will get to some level. Okay. Now, so 225 in 2024, it means that a very large share of the world is already below replacement. You know this way better than I do, but I have realized that, especially among some economists, sometimes this very simple formula I'm going to show you, people forget about it. You read in the news, oh, replacement rate is 2.1. Well, not quite so. The replacement rate is defined as an approximation as 1 plus the sex ratio at birth divided by the probability of a woman to survive to 30. This is just taking it from Preston's demographic textbook. And yes, it is true that for an advanced country, the replacement rate is around 2.1 because sex ratio at birth is 1.05 and the probability of survival is 0.98, but there is a lot of selective abortions in a big chunk of Asia, which means that the sex ratio is not 1.05, it's closer to 1.1 in a lot of countries. And also we still have higher rates of mortality among younger women. So for a lot of countries, the replacement rate can actually be as high as 2.3, 2.4. Okay? Nonetheless, the United Nations doesn't really report replacement rates country by country. What they report is net reproduction rate, which is not exactly the same, although it's very close. So I'm going to show you this map. And in this map, what I'm just using is the following. I'm showing in blue countries where the total fertility rate is below 2.1. And in red, countries where the total fertility rate, according to the United Nations, is above 2.1. That means that everything that is blue, we know is below replacement rate. And a few countries that are red are above replacement rate. So they are also below replacement rate. And what is really amazing when you look about this is that by now, pretty much the whole of the Americas is below replacement rate. In fact, even some of the countries that you see over there are already below replacement rate, and I will try to convince you later that I don't quite understand some of the numbers that the United Nations is reporting. Okay? So for instance, countries like Panama or the Dominican Republic, I think that all the evidence is that they are below 2.1. Now, you see also absolutely all Europe, a big chunk of Asia, sorry, just a little bit oversensitive, a little bit of Asia. And the other thing that I find very interesting is that for the first time, there is a country in Africa below 2.1, which is Tunisia. Okay? And I'm going to come back to that also later on. But I mean, to me, this is really very, very striking map of the world, and it really tells you how far we have gone in terms of fertility. Okay. So those are, to me, at least, the three more interesting results. Peak is closer. The adjustments come from basically from a few countries, and fertility has fallen down faster than this. Okay. So far, I hope I have not really provided much editorial comment. So now I'm going to start with editorial. Okay? So this is the place where you can be unhappy with me and tell me that I'm complete. So Patrick and I have been spending a lot of time looking at the data. And at this moment, the world population prospect 2024 doesn't make a lot of sense to us. Okay? And I'm going to try to tell you why we think that that's not the case, but we are very happy to be correct. Okay? Look, I'm in a position in my life where I don't care if I publish this paper or not. I just want to know the data. I want to know if this is true. So the first thing that really got our attention, we already saw it in the 2022, but in 2024, revision is even more striking, is the very large discrepancy between vital registries and United Nations birth data. And this is true even for countries that the United Nations assess as having complete vital statistics in the methodology. So you get the world population prospect, and then they have this methodological volume, and they list the countries where they say, oh, I think this country has complete vital statistics. And then whatever that country, you go to the National Statistics Institute of that country, and you look at the number of births on the Excel file of the United Nations, and they're very different. So I would like someone to tell me why. Yes.
Are they usually, is one usually higher?
Yes, dramatically higher. Okay, so Colombia, okay, and this is, I'm going to pick 3 countries where the United Nations assess as having complete vital statistics, and I have tried to reach local demographers in these countries to tell me, do you think your vital statistics are correct? And again, you may know much more about Colombia than I do, but I brought this with Ivan, who's over there, and who's Colombian, as you can tell from his accent. Okay, so at least we are not completely unaware of what is happening in Colombia. Now, according to DANE, the National Institute of Colombian Statistics, first of all, they tell me we are pretty sure we are counting everyone. Maybe we miss a few, but they say we really think we are getting this right. In 2023, they estimate there were 510,000 births in Colombia. And according to the United Nations, there were over 700. This is a 40% difference. We are not, look, if this was 510 versus 520, fine. It's not a big deal. This is 40% difference. It's a huge difference. In addition, they assume that births went up in this period, and they tell me that there is no way births went up in that. And you can tell that maternity wards been closed, primary schools been empty. Those kids do not exist. Okay? Why is this the case? And we sent an email to the United Nations people, and the answer they gave us was, we don't want to be analysts. To be analysts. Which, I don't know. We're supposed to put together the data, not to make commentary. Okay, Turkey. So I actually just got an email this morning. Some of you may know there's a lot of very good Turkish economists. So I actually did a sample among my Turkish economist friends, and I asked, who is the top demographer in Turkey? And they told me some guy in London. Anyway, so I brought to him, and I asked, okay, Ibrahim is his name. Ibrahim, the vital statistics, they have something called like the Central Statistic Agency Database Registry. Say, are you guys accurate? He tells me, look, Erdogan doesn't joke. Okay, we measure everyone. We are not missing people. Okay, this is not the type of guy that likes to be missing potential recruits. So they have, according to their National Institute of Statistics, 953,000 beds. According to the United Nations, is 1,072. So even in a country like Turkey, we are talking about 10%. Okay, and Egypt. Now, I talk with people in Egypt, they tell me they are only reasonably sure they are getting this number right, but they didn't swear over the tomb of their ancestors that they got everyone, as they tell me in Turkey. Okay, in Turkey they say, we got everyone, we are not missing. Now, look at this. The vital statistics are slightly over 2 million. Look at the United Nations, 2.4 million. So again, we are talking about a difference of 20%. That's a huge difference. And look, they claim that this thing is going up. Egypt has monthly releases, and we already have the monthly releases for the first 6 months of 2024, and births are falling at around 5%. Okay? So that going to the point is we actually have an Excel file with every country in the world, with whatever statistical agency we have been able to find on the internet, and what the United Nations says. And nearly for all of them, the National Statistics Agency says there are much fewer births than you guys say. There is, by the way, one exception where they get into the same decimal, which is China. Particularly, I don't want to be negative. I think that the reason they want to get China absolutely right is because I'm pretty sure that someone from the Chinese government has called the United Nations, as I pointed out, the Chinese statistics are highly accurate. I can't go back to that because probably the Chinese statistics are not accurate. So the fact that some statistics where there has been really a lot of doubt is the ones that the United Nations believes 100%, kind of makes me a little bit funny. Now, why does this matter a lot?
It's a good time to
Sure, of
start.
course, anytime you want.
So, I mean, I actually have current projects with Turkey and Egypt working on this question. The UN doesn't only use civil registers in these two countries and other countries, even if those countries are coded as complete. Complete doesn't mean 100%.
Yes, no, I know. They call them as 90% or more.
Yes. So, in these two countries, surveys show that actually fertility and mortality is higher than what is reported by the civil registers. So in fact, the UN combines all this information and then they come up with what they think is the best answer, but that's typically going to be higher than the civil registers in countries like Egypt and Turkey.
No, I give you the point.
It's actually,
Colombia as well.
Yeah.
Colombia is the same situation, like,
Yeah.
because they use also DHS, census estimates to get the fertility count.
Yeah, but we're talking about a 40% in a like Colombia.
so Turkey, for example, doesn't cover, civil registers don't cover refugees.
Yes, I know that. Yeah, I know that.
They-
That's one of the things that I.
There's a lot of little things here and there that explain this difference, that can easily explain these differences.
But even in countries like South Korea, they estimate higher and Chile. Do I think that statistics in South Korea are not right? And again, if it was always, no, I understand.
And the other thing is that the UN works with rates, they work with fertility rates,
Yes.
not with numbers.
No, I understand, but the problem is if
The
you.
population that
Yeah.
matters too, and they put it all together to come up with the best estimates. So things add up in the UN in a way that may not add up in a civil register.
Okay, I'll come back to that because there is a few things from the United Nations that maybe do not add. But yes, if I give you the point, maybe Turkey, you have extra 100,000 beds because of these people that are not computed. Maybe Egypt, they are not getting this right, but why is the vital statistics going down while the United Nations is growing? That doesn't. So if you're telling me that there is a level issue, I can't believe that, but the trend just seems very difficult.
So this surveys that over the years has indicated that fertility is going in a certain direction, together with the increase of the population.
So the coverage of the vital statistics is getting worse. That's very hard. I don't think it's very difficult to make the point. And again, maybe Turkey, maybe Egypt, but I have looked at data from Latin America. They just don't make any sense. For Latin America, it's 40% in Colombia, just doesn't make any sense. And I'm going to show you like some numbers now for Colombia. Okay? And I was saying is why this makes so much sense to me. Sorry, doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because of course, as you say, sometimes we think about total fertility rates, but when we think about issues like total sizes of the population, these differences in number of births really do add to a lot of difference. Okay? So something I always use is this thing I call the rule of 85, which is basically saying, look, you go to countries like Japan, Spain, South Korea that have very high fertility rates, they are around 85. So imagine that you have a country where from this moment on, you have 1,000 births per year, every year. And then you ask what will be the population in about 100 years. Given that the life expectancy is 85, it's just 85,000. Okay, so I use this very quickly in my head when I'm trying to look at how does this number of births imply, what does this number of births imply, module immigration for the size of the country. And again, going back to the example of Colombia, Colombia had 510,000 births, according to DANE, in 2023, which means that the long-run population will be around 43 million. They are able to keep the current number of births. The current population is 52, and yet the United Nations keeps saying this will go up all the way to 60, nearly 60. And I just don't see that in the data. Okay? So why does the United Nations come up with those numbers? Well, basically, I already showed you because they assume that the number of births is much, much higher, but also the death they get about right. They also assume things for migration which do not make a lot of sense to what I observe. Okay? So the United Nations switched from assuming that migration into Colombia, that there were a lot of Colombians migrating out of Colombia, into assuming this big peak of migration, net migration into Colombia, and then this small decrease. Now, I could give you the point that there were a couple of years of very large net migration into Colombia because of Venezuela, the crisis in Venezuela, but that has completely disappeared. And in fact, at this moment, the net flows from Colombia into Venezuela are probably negative. That means there are more Venezuelans returning to Colombia because things have improved a little bit economically. And there is a lot of Colombians moving into the United States and a lot of Colombians moving into Spain. And this, I literally just got this from the Statistical Agency of Colombia yesterday, and what they actually compute is that they are having a negative migration of 350,000 a year, which is a lot. Okay, and just to give you a sense of how much is, if there are 510,000 Colombians being born in a year, and you're having 350,000 net migration into the exterior, is around 60%, even a little bit more than 60% of the new births in some sense are leaving the country. Okay? And if you put together the number of deaths in Colombia, the number of births in Colombia, and the 350,000, Colombia is already losing population. And yet the United Nations is still assuming this big growth where they are going to add another 8 million. I just don't see anything in the data. That's it. Okay? And again, if this was just Colombia, okay, fine. Maybe it's Colombia, didn't get Colombia right. But again, we have seen similar, very odd patterns for tons of countries. And again, I'm happy if the United Nations writes a careful explanation of why they are doing this and what their assumptions. We couldn't really find those explanations. China, I already told you, funny enough, they get this absolutely on top, so they don't seem to be having any problem with this. The second thing is forecast. They have some forecast, and I know, look, forecasting is a complicated business. But the forecast, to me, really look odd. So this is China. Okay? So the dean, over there in the dean's office, is under the impression that I do time series econometrics, even my colleagues, economics department. Okay? Victor gives me a lot of hard time because he says I waste my time doing time series econometrics. Now, remember, continuous line is what we have observed. And I'm not telling you this is fertility. I'm just telling you this is an arbitrary time series in statistics. And I'm telling you, what do you think this is going to happen in the next 10 years? I don't know. It's kind of rebound. I know why they get that mechanically speaking. They basically have this Bayesian hierarchical model that has this very strong reversion to the mean. And that gets this very strong reversion to the mean. But I don't see that in the data. It's very difficult for me to. Maybe it's just the case, and I'm going to come back to that in a second. This may happen, but if we are really making forecasts about the future, we need to be aware that this is an issue. In India, they don't assume it rebounds, but again, because this type of models go back to the mean, basically what it's saying, look, India has been falling all the time non-stop, and then it stabilizes. Chile, another very interesting case, keeps going down, keeps going down. There was a little bit of a rebound one year. This is basically people who delay births because of COVID lockdowns. And they say, look, this is going to go up. So Chile, I was actually looking at the Chile Instituto Nacional de Estadística this morning. Births in Chile have fallen 23% this year in the first semester with respect to the first semester of 2023. Okay? So basically in Chile, what we are observing is that births are falling down immensely fast. Yes, I know this birth is not total fertility rate, but what do I see in Chilean data that tells me they are going to go back to 1.4? United States, they basically assume we will stabilize. Again, I don't really see anything in the data in the United States suggesting that we will stabilize and go back a little bit up. But the best of all is South Korea. Now, we already have data for the first months of 2024 in South Korea. Births and the estimated total fertility rate continue going down, but the United Nations says all this is going to go all the way back. And the fact is, I go to the data and I have never seen a country that has had this type of figures. Okay, so I'm actually in a research project now with Jim Heckman and a couple of other people at Chicago. We are trying to very carefully measure if everything that Orban did in Hungary really made a difference or not. Seems to have made a little bit, but certainly you don't go back to 1.7 to 1.3. I don't know where this is coming from. So this is the only thing that the United Nations says. Okay, so this is page 23, box 2.1. The rebound in future fertility for low fertility countries is consistent with an expectation of continued progress towards gender equality and women empowerment and improving social and economic opportunities for young people and families. Which seems to me, the econometric model gave us this. My boss insists that I should report this data, and I need to come up with some explanation. That is hard-facing.
I think this is what they say, right? I don't think they claim the fertility forecast is based on any econometric, but basically say it's based on a long-term assumption that reflects this. So I agree with you, it's not plausible, but I don't think it's different from what they're saying. I think they face various,
No, I understand. And this,
that's the assumption they make, and they
okay, yes.
And I think what you're pointing out is correct. It's an assumption that either I know you believe is accurate, but I think they are upfront in saying this is what we do.
So I'm not so sure that that's the case. And let me tell you what I mean. So when you are doing forecasting, at least the way we do this in econometrics, we tend to distinguish between a conditional and unconditional forecast. So an unconditional forecast is just saying, given what I have seen so far, what do I think is going to happen? Conditional forecast is there may be changes in this. Okay? So if you are going to say this is a conditional forecast that incorporates these assumptions that there is going to be a lot of things that are going to happen, that are going to move things in a different direction, I'm happy. But Again, this is buried in page 23 in a box. It's not, it doesn't give me the impression in the press release or in the material they distribute to the press, in the chapter, in the introduction of the world population forecast, in the what the.
And I agree, I agree with that, but I think the fertility forecasts in the world population area have been contentious for a very long time. For a very long time, they've simply assumed stabilize at replacement, and then they acknowledged it may stabilize at below replacement. Now they made a bunch of different assumptions. So in mortality, they've done much better where they have, some systematic forecasting. On fertility, my sense is, on one hand, they acknowledge that we don't have any good long-term fertility forecasts. We don't have projection models, they have huge confidence intervals. So we simply don't know long-term fertility forecasts. And they make a set of assumption, kind of navigating political pressures, what have they. And I agree with you that none of that is plausible. You're so a good example, but I think they are fairly upfront in what they are doing, and there's lots of debate out there that one needs to question the forecast for these reasons.
The thing is, I have encountered it myself. I go and I say, look, we need to think about the economic policy consequences of this, and people tell me, no, you should not worry because fertility rate. So I think that this may be something that is well understood by demographers, and I'm not going to deny that. But I'm telling you, this is not something that is fully understood in the policy. And people are really taking the United Nations forecast as the gold standard of what is going to happen. They are making decisions, for instance, about social security reforms based on this. That has real consequences. So I really think that perhaps we could do things in a slightly different way.
But anyway, I think there's room.
No, sure.
Not disputing anything you say, I think.
Anyway, there are some numbers that are just bizarre. So this is the net migration into the planet. And it should be zero unless Elon Musk knows way more than give credit for. Of course, this is just a consequence of not rounding properly. But come on, if you are going to put an Excel file on the internet, at least be sure that you do these things properly. This is a little bit of a cheap shot, but if the Excel file, you kind of sum rows and columns and they don't add up, you at least get a little bit nervous about some of the details of how they make it go. Okay? I'm an editor of a journal. Believe me, when I see papers that make this mistake, they make me very nervous about the rest of the paper. Okay. And finally, there are issues related with level effects. Okay. So over the last year and a half, we have had 2 censuses, one in Brazil and one in Paraguay. Some of you may have been involved in building those censuses, and if you are, please let me know. I downloaded the methodological background of both of them. I think both of them were done very seriously. They were also done with a lot of help from the European Union and money from the European Union. And they actually not only report point estimates of the population, but they also report confidence intervals to include things like, are we missing migrants? Are we missing refugees? Etc. In Brazil, we counted 203 million people, not 212. In Paraguay, we counted 6.1 million people, not 6.9 million. So there seem to be big differences in levels, at least in the countries. Now, are these differences in levels going to appear in other countries? I'm not sure. Now, I have a suspicion because I was talking with people, for instance, from Paraguay, and I was asking them why suddenly over 12% of Paraguayans do not exist anymore. And they were telling me, especially in rural areas, in previous censuses, it was guesswork. And the incentives were always in such a way that in the guesswork, you wanted to do it at once. Okay, so, you thought there were around 40,000 people, you will say, no, I think there are 60,000. And those add up. Will be the same in Africa. I don't know. You probably know that since many of you have experience with Africa, you probably know that better than me. My suspicion, and this is just a suspicion, I can be 100% wrong, is that in a lot of African countries, we actually go and count people carefully, we will find fewer. Okay? Now, by the way, this may explain why fertility and birth rates look that they haven't fallen so much so fast in Latin America, because maybe the base was not 6.9 million, it was 6. So instead of having something very steep like that, we have something a little bit mild like that. So, there is like effects going in both directions, and we are very open about it. But just correcting for Brazil, so I just take the, yes.
Sorry, for Brazil, they just released like 1 month ago, the National Statistic Office. And it's 212 because you have like the census,
Yes,
population
exactly.
survey and everything. So it's 212. It's
Okay, so why the first census was 203 then?
you have like omission, coverage issues, and so on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well then forget about Brazil, the Paraguay. The Paraguay.
It's half of South America.
Yeah, no, I will look at
It's
the
half
new,
of South
I will look
America.
at the new. The only thing that worries me a little bit, let me tell you what it is, that they may have go back, review the numbers to get them be more or less what they needed to be. Because that's what China did with the new numbers in fertility, and then what they do is in the next releases, they kind of adjust them.
For Brazil, I wouldn't be so sure.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I mean, if it happens to be the case that Brazil is not there, I'm fine. But the point is, are we getting the levels right or not? And the other thing that I want to mention, which is this is important, is now we're in a difficult situation. And now I'm going to be, I don't think I'm going to be nasty at all. Okay? It's much easier when something is growing, it's much easier to forecast where it's going because most of it is just a stock. Even if you get the flow wrong, it don't make a big difference. But when you're trying to forecast a flat, something that is getting very, very flat, a concave function that is getting very flat, even very small assumptions make you big, big differences. Okay, so even just getting a small, instead of getting, you say it's 2.25, I say it's 2.24, which is, the second decimal will move the peak of the world population in size 10, 20 years. And that's something that perhaps we could do a better job at communicating, that now that we are getting to the top, things can change very quickly, very fast. Anyway, so what Patrick and I did, and I give you the point that you were telling me about Turkey, Egypt, maybe we didn't do this absolutely right, and maybe we can play, but trying to look at vital statistics and try to reconcile them with fertility rates, we get that the total fertility rate in 2024 is 217. So we get it around 0.08 lower. Again, I'm happy if you tell me maybe it's not 220, not 217, it's maybe 221. I'm happy with that, but I think it's a little bit low. And if you add to that the fact that now a lot of the births are happening in Africa, and in Africa you have a lot of high female mortality, young female mortality, that probably has pushed up the replacement level a little bit higher than in the past, just because much fewer of the births are happening in China with low mortality, much more are happening in Nigeria with high mortality. We get that the world replacement rate is around 2. And that basically says that we may already be being. Now, there is uncertainty about these numbers, and maybe it was not 2023, maybe it's 2024, maybe it's 2025, but I think that the evidence is that we are already, as a globe, we are already replacement rate, more or less. And Patrick and I compute a forecast where we get that the peak of the population will be 255. Now, this is not that different from the 284 of the world population prospect, because it's actually the same year, more or less, that in the low fertility scenario. So basically, my statement is, I think of the three forecasts, coming back to the credibility of the forecast, I think my prior puts more belief on the low fertility forecast than on the medium forecast. And it's also roughly the same number that study for the group, the demographic group at Washington University, that came out in Lancet just a few months ago. Okay, so all of us are more or less saying this is going to happen some moment in the middle of the 2050s. Okay, so let me wrap up and saying, okay, so you know, like in the Orson, what does a girl like you do in a bar like this one? Why do macroeconomists like me care about this? Okay? And basically because I have became convinced that this is going to be absolutely fundamental to think about data. And it's going to be very fundamental to think about, as I mentioned before, issues like social security, healthcare, etc. Okay, so let me take the case of Japan. So Japan is the poster child of bad economic performance. Okay? Imagine that you are in the plane and you're sitting on the plane and there's, the last thing you want to do when you're sitting on the plane and someone asks you what do you do is to say you're an economist, because they are going to ask you either about the stock market or about whether or not a recession is coming. So you sit on the plane and someone will tell you, okay, so what is up with Japan? And the average person out there has this idea of Japan being the poster child of bad economic performance. And, at the face value, they seem to be right. Between 1991 and 2019, GDP in Japan, the amount of goods and services in Japan, grew at an annual rate of 0.83, which is really very good. While in the US was 2.58%. And in fact, you pick, any library of books in economics, and you're going to find tons of books about everything that is wrong with Japan. There is even a word Japanization. I cite from a book that became a bestseller by Pesek. Few lessons are more timely or critical than those offered by Japan. A once vibrant model for developing economies that lost its way and has been struggling to relocate it ever since. Okay, and you pick the American Economic Review, and I bet you that over the last decade there have been 50 papers. What is wrong with them? Okay. My bold claim is that all those papers are meaningless. And basically, the argument that I'm going to make is that Japan is doing as well as they can. So the first row is GDP growth. I'm going to pick the G7, the 7 largest economies in the world plus Spain, which is the next largest economy among the advanced economies, because I was curious about it, obviously, being from Spain. And what you see in the first row is that, in fact, Japan in red has been doing terribly, only 0.83%. And Italy, only Italy is doing worse, 0.7. The US is doing the best, 2.58. Now, you start seeing that there is a little bit of something going on when you look at GDP per capita. Because in GDP per capita, the US goes all the way down to 1.63, because population in the US has still been growing nearly at a 1% a year, while in Japan, it has grown only 0.08. Okay, so what happened is in the early 90s, grew a little bit, and then it has gone. But the really interesting thing is when you say, let me get a sense of how much GDP we are producing, given the able bodies. By able bodies, I mean, I don't care if there is a lot of young people like kids around. They don't really produce output in another area. And I don't care about how many people you have over 70 or 75. Okay, because again, they are retired and they are at home. So I want to have a sense of how much we are producing and how much we are growing, even the amount of people I can really put to work. Now, this is not a uniquely, there are different ways in which you can do this. I'm going to report 3. And we actually, in the paper, we report many more. This is a paper I wrote with Gustavo Ventura and Wen Zhao called The Wealth of Working Nations. So the first thing we did was to look at GDP per working age adult. Okay, this is basically saying the OECD and other statistical agencies look and define a working age adult when you're between 15 and 64. What has happened that Japan has had a big drop in working age adults, much more than in population, because what now you have is a lot of old people. And guess what? Now Japan has been growing at a 139%. Suddenly, Japan is doing better than France, and is doing roughly the same that Spain and Germany, and only a little bit worse than us. And if you think in addition to it that we have a population that is much older, that is less innovative, etc., that seems to me that Japan has done quite well. Now, you are going to tell me, Jesus, I know that a lot of old people in Japan work. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to redefine working age adult to 69. Because yes, a lot of Japanese work until 69, but then after that it goes down a lot. And again, nothing much changes, 121 versus 158 in the US. Or you just forget about counting people and just counting hours work. We also did with taking students, we did like a lot of things. You know, this is going to change like the second decimal, and it's not really changing the picture. And we also look at hours work. And in hours work, Japan is growing at 126, the US at 153. So why is Japan growing so slowly? They seem to be doing okay in terms of how much they grow given their labor inputs. They just have fewer labor inputs. That's it. Okay? So kind of a very, very fast way in which you can think about this is, let me call average economy in 1970. So your average rich economy in 1970 is growing 2% productivity, let's say, and 1% population. So you grow 3% in any given year. Sometimes you do a little bit better, sometimes you do a little bit worse, 2%. Now, your population, your labor input is going down 1%. Even if productivity is still growing 2% a year, you grow 1% on average. In a good year, you grow 2. In a bad year, you grow 0. That's Japan. That's basically what Japan is doing. They just have fewer labor inputs, so the economy is not doing very well in total. And it's not that the Bank of Japan has done something wrong. It's not that, you know, the Japanese economists have not read the textbook in macroeconomics and have forgotten to do the right thing. And what we try to claim in the paper is that the present of Japan is going to be the future of all these present economies. Because when you have economies like Chile or Colombia or Brazil with these big drops in fertility, they are just going to start losing population, working age population, or hours work very soon, and you are going to be in that situation. And then good luck trying to pay for your social security. Now, more speculative, and I finish and we can chat a little bit, is somehow I have come to get convinced now that the total fertility rate kind of in the middle run of middle income countries like Colombia, Chile, Taiwan, or Turkey may end up being lower than the total fertility rate of rich countries, at least outside East Asia. So we always had this view of the world where the very rich countries were the ones with lower fertility and the poor countries are going to be the ones with high fertility. What I see right now is that Latin America has lower fertility. Many places in Latin America has lower fertility than Spain. You know, in Spain, we are doing pretty badly. Okay? According to CONAPO, the Consejo Nacional de la Población, they had a press conference, it was either May or June, and the director of CONAPO thinks that the total fertility rate of the US in 2024 is higher, or will be higher than the total fertility rate. And have you told me 25 years ago that US will be the high fertility country in the US-Mexico comparison? I would say something. Okay, and he actually gave this number. It's very interesting. The press conference is online. He actually stated, I don't know, you know, but he's at CONAPO. He seems to know what he's doing. The Mexicans are very serious on this. That the fertility rate in Mexico City is 0.9. Just imagine how this is going to change Mexico in a few years. Migration, in addition to it, may make the situation even worse because every Colombian that migrates to Spain is making a Spanish situation better and is making Colombia's situation better. So now let's a little bit of an anecdote. The reason I started looking at Colombia so much was because I went to Spain 1 year ago and I took like 5 Ubers and every Uber driver was Colombian. And I basically called Ivan, who is my postdoc, and I say, Ivan, you're the only Colombian who's not living in Madrid. And he said, yes, it's probably the case. Okay? So if you have 300,000 Colombians moving to Spain, that's really making a huge difference, given that you're having around 500,000 births a year. And this creates a whole range of challenges. And these middle-income countries may not have the margins of maneuver that Japan has. Okay? So Japan is a rich, advanced economy that can issue a lot of public debt, and Japan may have been able to navigate this more or less without a population, without a collapse of the economy. But what is going to do Colombia or Mexico or Chile when they are having a 1% drop labor input year after year after year after year? How are you going to get this economy going? Okay? So that's why I titled my article, the world fertility crisis is what it is. Anyway, thanks a lot for your comments, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
So you mentioned at one point once the word incentives.
Yes.
And my question is, what are the incentives driving the UN to not make the data more accurate?
So I think coming back to that point, I think it's
politics.
Yeah, so I think a lot of it is politics, a lot of it, look, the fact that you get China absolutely right, and that there is no difference whatsoever between what the United Nations says and what the Chinese Institute of National Statistics says, it's purely politics. So I actually had a student who wrote his dissertation on when you need to revise your forecast systematically, always on the same direction. Think about it. Okay? So if every year you need to take out people from your population forecast, my suspicion is that they want to smooth the adjustment they want to make. They don't want to say, probably over here, they already thought that this was more likely coming back. Just forget about what is plausible, what is politically. And what you want to do is take out 300 million or 150 million in every forecast. So most people don't notice it. By the way, the Federal Reserve System in the US does a little bit the same. When we are forecasting interest rates, you don't kind of change from one to the other. Every meeting of the Federal Open Market Committee, you take out 25 basis points. The hope that no journalist will have the whole press releases. So I think that a lot of it is smoothing, and a lot of it may be exactly and the email that I got. They say, we do not want to be alarmist. We don't want to give the impression that this is going to create a lot of problems, and we want to be a little bit more moderate. We want to be more moderate. Cautious means a little bit. And coming back to my point, at least from my perspective, I think in the US there's enough human capital that when the United Nations says something, people don't take it at face value. When you go to the next level of countries, the United Nations says something, it really shapes the policy discussion. I'm a little bit worried that these population forecasts are not shaping the discussion, at least considering the wide range of risk that one may.
Has anyone tried to ground truth any of these estimates? Like you mentioned, maternity wards closing.
So what?
Ground truth, like, go and count up the, maternity wards and, look at other sources of data, try to figure out whether, Michelle's idea, okay, that's one way. Then there's the registry, but some other third, method to try to figure out like what the reality is.
Yeah. So there is this chap in China. Well, he's at Wisconsin, but he's a Chinese demographer. And what he does is he looks at two sources of extra information. One is the number of vaccines that they are buying for when the kids is in the maternity wards, how many vaccines, and how many people get enrolled in primary school. And he finds there are probably around 500,000 Chinese being born fewer a year than with the Chinese statistics that we just said. Now, in this map, one country that is still in red, but it's a big population country, is Indonesia. So I talk with people at the World Bank, trying to get data on primary education enrollment. Now, of course, that goes back to your point, is primary education enrollment 100%? But if you assume that the enrollment has been constant or increasing, just looking at population and primary school enrollment will give you a sense of how fertility is coming out. And I think that if in any case, it's probably going down. Okay? And for sure, what these economists at the World Bank has told me, hopefully we will have access to that data soon, is that primary school enrollment has grown much faster than the United Nations births plus 6 years.
Okay, we run out of time. I will have, this is a quick question about the example of Japan.
Yes.
It seems that you get different economic implications if you look at the per capita or if you look at the aggregate.
Yes.
So what should we be looking at, the per
Okay.
capita or the?
So what we argue in the paper is that you want to have a battery of indicators. So total matters if you care about two things. One, can we pay my public debt? How many aircraft carriers I can buy? Per capita matters if you are asking yourself how much staff we have per person. Per working age adult per hour is telling you how well are we doing in terms of producing more staff given the workers. So what I want to do is that people get used to look at three different numbers instead of only looking at.
If you're thinking about opportunities for young people.
Yeah.
Would you look at the aggregate or the per capita?
Hard to tell, but probably the aggregate will give you, because the markets are not growing. So another paper I have with Gustavo Ventura, is we are trying to link this growth of output with the performance of the stock market. And basically what we try to argue is that the reason the US market is still doing quite well is because the output is growing, and just think about the stock market as the valuation of all the profits, care about the total profits, not the per capita profits.
Okay, we run out of time. Thank you.